Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our transatlantic conversation. For nearly 3 years, we've enjoyed the privilege of hosting Association Transformation for the international membership community. Over nearly 40 hours and 70 plus episodes, we've hosted more than 100 guests from the UK, the USA, Australia, South Africa, and many points in between. Regular listeners will know that over the years, we've covered a huge variety of topics, from change management, leadership relationships, and 4-day weeks, to financial strategy, income generation, and modern governance practice. And of course, who could possibly forget the unicorns and the puppy dogs episode? We really hope you enjoy every episode, and while we will always make our content freely available, remember, subscribe wherever you get your favorite pods. If you would like to lend us your support, you can do so by subscribing to the pod from as little as $5 a month. Now, hopefully, it goes without saying that Elisa and I and the whole Association Transformation production team will appreciate your generosity and your ongoing support. To subscribe, visit patreon.com/Association Transformation and choose the monthly subscription level that suits you best. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Association Transformation. And remember, whatever you're up to today, put your members and your mission first. Enjoy the pod. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Association Transformation, the transatlantic podcast, transatlantic conversation, exploring all things membership, all things associations, all things non-profit. Sadly, I am once again flying solo as your only host on this week's pod because Elisa is, well, how dare she? She's off making money for a living. So what can you say? I, however, have the privilege of continuing a transatlantic conversation just with somebody new to the pod. I'm delighted to welcome from Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Michael Tatonetti, who joins us from Pricing for Associations. Hi, Michael. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well, Andrew. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm very good. I must admit, I'm reading you. I've got your biography in front of me, and I'm like, whoa, he's an association forum, 40 under 40. I'm a bit impressed, a bit intimidated as well.
No, no need, no need. Yeah.
He says with a smile, like, yeah, be impressed, be.
No, 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 not at all. No. Although that is something I definitely treasure. That
Good.
was that was one that meant a lot to me.
Yeah, fantastic. No, you should. And so you got that when did you get that?
It was either 2020 or maybe 2021. It was during COVID because I remember that we couldn't go in person to Chicago for
Yeah.
the award ceremony. We were virtual.
Okay.
So it was either 20 or 21. I think it was 20.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
subsequently, have you had that celebration? Because
So
if
they
not,
did.
we can go do it.
We can't. No, we should go. We should go to a happy hour. They did the following year when they were back, or a year later when they were back. At some point, they did invite back those of us that could not be there in person. But then I was scheduled to speak at another conference at the same time, so I didn't get to go. I wasn't available. So I have not yet gone in person, but they did a great job celebrating us virtually. I mean, that's memorable.
Well, that is fantastic. And you've now given me a legitimate reason to take you out on the town to acknowledge your. I mean, quite frankly, if I got that,
Mhm.
I'd celebrating it in my 80s. I
Yeah.
would absolutely be shouting from the treetops. But why you're joining us today is I'm delighted that we've got another author, another contributor to the association's Evolve publication that came out
Mhm.
earlier this year. It's so good that so many colleagues have sort of been willing to share their insights, first of all, and their expertise, first of all, in the publication, but also,
Mhm.
joining us on the podcast. And Michael, you wrote, and it really resonated with me. You've written the article, and we'll publish the links to this in the podcast notes. But you've published an article around, questioning, should I sunset my program?
Mhm.
And I read it. First of all, I just saw the headline, and instinctively I say yes.
If you're questioning it, usually the answer is
Yeah,
probably
exactly.
yes.
Yes, that's right. If you need to question whether it needs to, yeah, should it go or should it stay? But how common a problem is it? A problem? Is it a problem in the membership world that we're not certain associations? We're not certain of whether we should sort of hold on to, as Elisa likes to call it, our sacred cows,
Mhm.
or well, yeah, well, so I suppose the analogy is to slaughter them, but to absolve ourselves of
Yes.
those pet projects. Is it a problem?
Yes.
Do people
Yeah,
challenge letting go?
it is. I think that it's one of the underbellies of the association space because we have amazing members who are typically members long term and are serving and are so invested in what we do. They also, again, that underbelly, the other side of that is we can become very territorial of what we do and thinking, yeah, this is, it's what's needed. And I think that doesn't leave room for innovation. It doesn't leave room for asking younger generations what they need and reimagining.
Hmm.
Because sometimes the answer isn't to sunset an entire program, it might be a part of a program,
Yeah,
or it might be reevaluating, like doing it in a new or in a different way. And of course, those can all also be buzzwords, right? Like innovation and,
yeah,
trying to use technology. So it's not about that. It's not about just saying something without meaning, but it is about saying, are we best serving our membership, our audience, our sponsors, whatever the program is? Are we best serving them? And if not, how can we serve even better? That to me is really kind of the question. So at the heart of that article, especially, to me, it's almost like the two lenses that you're looking at is how much value is this giving to the audience and how much resource does it take up from our organization? Does it make sense? And if you can answer yes to both of those, then great. But if not, that's where you at least need to question or be able to have a defense for why are you doing what you're doing. I think personally.
no, and I think I completely agree with you. I think we spend a lot of time talking about, at a personal level, we spend a lot of time talking about personal reflection and having the sort of ability to sort of reflect and see what value one is adding in a professional context. Sometimes I wonder if there is that level of corporate emotional intelligence, if you like,
Mhm.
um, where you know leadership teams, be they volunteer leadership teams or the staffers, whether they necessarily have or want the ability to sort of take that step backward. And I think and to reflect. And I think it's interesting that, and you've touched immediately on a point that I don't suppose I'd really thought of, but inhibiting um, innovation potentially because you've got so much
Mhm.
resource wrapped up into one
Mhm.
element of your business. But that
Mhm.
piece around sort of generational expectations, I hadn't really thought of it in those terms before.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that as a barrier to sort of recruiting and retaining new, fresh members who are coming into the profession,
Mhm.
not sunsetting your programs, not or refreshing them or shelving them for a wee while and then bringing them back out and dusting them off can be a massive sort of prohibitor to sort of business growth.
Yeah, I think so. I love the term that you used, corporate emotional intelligence. I love that. And that's because you think of the makeup of who is serving, who is volunteering. Typically, now I'm not just talking task force level, but when you're looking at committees and then especially like the board, it's going to be typically your more seasoned professionals.
Mm.
That doesn't mean only a certain generation, but those who have, someone who's brand new, you're probably not going to have more than one YP, a young professional on a board, and if you even have that, right? So typically you want people to prove themselves and kind of go up the ranks and serve on committees and task forces and get to know them and all of that before they have that kind of a huge responsibility of being a board member. But because of that, it does mean that you have a certain demographic, and that lens does not actually represent your overall constituency. It is not a true random sampling of your membership. And therefore, they're voicing probably what represents at most half of your membership, but not all. And
Yeah.
so when it becomes personal and it's like, well, we've always done this awards, in December. It's like, yeah, you've done it for 20 years, you've been a member, and it does mean something to you. So you don't want to give that up. But are you running out of people to give the award to? Is it cheapening the award, right? Like, do we maybe move to an every other year award instead of every year? Or do we change the criteria? Do we up it? Do we lower it? Like, what do we do? What is the purpose? What is the mission of this thing? And how do we best do it rather than we've always done it that way? There can be a level of nostalgia. And again, that's part of community. Like, associations are a community. So to a degree, we want that. But to a degree, we also have to say, how do we stay relevant?
Yeah.
I think that if you as a culture don't do that, then that's when I would question, will you be around in 20 or 50 years to continue to execute the mission that you exist for?
Is it enough, or is it too simple to suggest this is just a sort of that quintessential sense of ownership, which we always quote? I mean, we all, we spend a lot of, both of us, we spend a lot of time working with boards and with senior leadership teams, and it's always quoted at us. And I dare say you use it as often as I do, which is, that unique sense of ownership. Is it as simple to say that it's that, or are there other underlying issues that prevent leadership teams from being willing to sort of really potentially be quite brutal with some of their programming?
That's a great question. I think it can be two things, and this is me very much so simplifying, right? A complex thing, but I think that's one is the ownership, the nostalgia, it's not we've always done it this way in like an evil stepmother way, like you think of a Disney movie, right? It's just it's worked. But I think the other issue is that when you answer the first question, which is this working, and the answer being maybe not optimally or no, the second question becomes, then what do we do? And I think that's the second big obstacle, is people don't know how to answer that. So if we admit that this part of a program or this entire program is not working, then okay, then what is the answer? If you don't know that answer, if you don't know how to figure out that answer, then you're left with, well, let's just keep going. Because, like, let's say an annual event needs to be changed, but it's coming every year and we're always planning years out with site selection and therefore the space. And then, the program is 6 to 12 months out, you're planning. So it's you're always, going ahead. So how do we change it? What does that look like? And how soon can we implement that? Something like membership or digital education, you might be able to change within a year, but an event might take a couple of years to really. So, but I think not having the answer to, if not this, then what? I think that's the second big obstacle.
And that's interesting. That is interesting. I also find, I don't know if you see this as well, but sometimes I think there's a lot of risk. I think there's a lot of risk aversion. And sometimes I think, rightly or wrongly, I think individuals sometimes don't want to be perceived as the group who rocked the boat and led the association toward disaster, because
right.
we got rid of this one day webinar or something.
Drive it into I'll use a transatlantic reference. They don't want to be the ones to drive the Titanic into the iceberg, right?
There you go. Absolutely. Absolutely. But then sometimes you think, where's your perspective on it? Because how reliant are you on one piece of business?
Yes.
That if you pull it back, change it, evolve it, scrap it. I mean, if you're that reliant on that one piece of business, then that is pointing towards something more fundamental about how you are or aren't running that organization.
Yes. And without risk, there is no reward. So you're going to fail at some things like that. So that's something, if I'm working with an org and we're evaluating, we're analyzing value and what adjustments are needed, and then price based on that. Sometimes you're not always going to like the answer. Sometimes it might be you need to add more value and not touch that price right now. So for me, let me backtrack real quick. When I think of adjustments and what is the right answer, I'm thinking value analysis. You're asking the audience and you're getting a proper sample from all of your segments on what needs to change. So it's not just saying that, right? But I usually start with a survey. I'll ask demographic questions so that we can segment.
Mhm.
And but then asking for this program, and this is generalized, but what's going well, what's not going well, that you would like for us to improve upon, what's missing, where else are you getting similar, whatever education or knowledge, and what can we learn from them? Um, those are some of the basic questions I always ask, and then you might, tweak it based on the product and specific goals. But from that to then understand, oh, okay, like this segment of, again, let's say young professionals values this, our
Mhm.
senior leaders value this, those who have made recent career changes value this. So then it may not be a matter of canceling an entire program. It might be what are you marketing? Like if your membership includes 15 bullet points, that's great. But these 6 matter most to YPs. These 8 matter most to this, to this, to this. So what are you marketing? Where do you lean into? And then based on those adjustments, how can you then change the price and get your fair share of that? So when you do that, if you think the answer, so I'm going to bring it back to what I had said the second problem is, which is what do we do?
Mhm.
If you think the answer is sitting in your boardroom, you're greatly mistaken, or in your staff room, you're greatly mistaken. You don't just sit around with how brilliant you all are and say, let's try this. That's just throwing spaghetti at the wall, just like, and you're guessing. When you go get data, when you get the voice of your customer and you ask them, what can we be doing better and how do we do it better? They're going to share with you what value they need. And then that leads to innovation. Then you say, okay, 38% of our members want this. Let's add it. And if we add that, then you do a pricing analysis and say, not only if we add that, can we go higher, but that would increase our profitability by this. We have the money for the technology or whatever resources are needed. So this is the step forward. And then if people fight it and go, but we vote, it's like, yeah, we know we have great pictures of doing this luncheon this way, and we're going to cherish that. But in 2023, like maybe people want more digital education, and then the luncheon, quarterly luncheon, to just be networking. And
Yeah.
they're not worried about education. They'd rather have on demand. They'd rather have us do more education, monthly education instead of quarterly or whatever they want, right? You listen, you keep your thumb on the pulse, you listen, let them tell you, and then let that data drive the decision.
Is the industry, and by I say that, I mean the membership industry, are we suffering from, I mean, this is a loaded question.
Mhm.
Are we suffering from a lack of business acumen at leadership level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And here's the thing though. I think that we're suffering from a lack of niched association business knowledge. It's an interesting intersection to me because you can have business leaders on your board, but things in the association space are slightly different. And so I think you need both business and nonprofit acumen. And so I think sometimes what you're lacking kind of shows. If you're lacking the business acumen, I think that is when I'm stereotyping, but I think that's when an association wants to give everything away for free
Mhm.
or as much as they can. They're not as worried about their reserves or their bottom line as long as it kind of balances. But they typically, again, don't have, they're not going to be able to withstand the storms, have reserves. They're probably not innovating or driving anything forward. On the other hand, I think if you have, the business acumen, then you probably have that financial, that operation in place. But what you can then risk, and I've seen this as well, is you're not really capturing the heartbeat of your members, your audience,
Yeah.
what they need, and they don't feel the community, they don't feel cared for, they don't feel like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the belonging and all of that. So you might have great information and a product that's priced well, but they don't feel bought in, and therefore you're now a commodity and they can get this knowledge anywhere. So
Yeah.
that intersection to me is understanding community and what they need from your organization, and you've got to be able to hit both. It's an interesting world to me.
Yeah. And I think there are too many. I think, well, I actually would argue that majority of organizations are not hitting that sweet spot.
Mm-mm.
Um, I think there are many that are getting away with it. But I think there are some that's just plain blind luck rather
Yeah.
than, rather than intent.
Yep.
I think sometimes my concern, and I don't know if you see this as well, Michael, but sometimes my concern is there's a heavy reliance on the decision makers,
Mhm.
from the decision makers on specialist staff to define or devise the business models,
Mhm.
but then not an unwillingness per se, but a lack of what's the word here? Well, I suppose it is acumen, but there's a
Mhm.
reliance on the specialist staffers to drive business at an operational level, but there's not
Mhm.
necessarily that same expectation of expertise at the volunteer leadership level.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And sometimes it depends on how much power you're giving them to in decision making or even just giving recommendations. I agree with that. Again, I think it's important to take their voice as a part of the greater, audience. But I agree. I think that the outside of the board, I think that the role of volunteers is more of getting the job done.
Yes, yeah, role
And I
is
don't want that. Yeah,
yeah.
I don't want to sound harsh, but I don't know that it should be much more than that.
Oh,
I think at the board level, that's where you are steering and making sure that finances are in order and the ED's doing what they should be, and everything's mission aligned. But again, even at the board level, I don't think that they should be um the only say or the final say always in like product development and value analysis, because again, typically they're a skewed segment,
yes, yeah,
just by nature. So
yeah.
yeah, I don't disagree there. And I think that's an interesting thing is, how do you govern pricing and value strategy? How do you govern where does it
Uh,
sit?
mm,
Who's involved? What voices are at the table? Because again, you can have these specialized staff who oversee whether it's they're overseeing a department or whatever, or if it's more C-suite operations, finance, the ED, the board. So I tend to see a lot of different setups.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
actually something I'm working on right now. I'm making a template, like a template is a great way to put it, but a pricing and value governance document for
Right.
associations to kind of say, here's what to consider, and this is what best practice might look like, but you got to tweak it. But it's interesting. It's all over the board.
Yeah, that is interesting. That is, but would you agree that it tends to be we don't rather than striking that balance
Mm-hmm.
at the decision making level, that
Mm-hmm.
actually what we're seeing is almost a perfect imbalance, whereas our volunteer or and our elected
Mm-hmm.
directors, members of the board, are
Mm-hmm.
only ever see or are habitually seeing decisions only from one perspective of i.e. the membership
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
getting striking their own personal balance between, well, actually, yes, we're there to reflect the membership. Of course we are. We have to
Yeah.
reflect the membership in the decision making, but ultimately their responsibility as directors is to
Mm-hmm.
the success of the organization. And
Yeah.
often I see, and I don't know if you're seeing this as well, but actually they're not necessarily at that individual level striking that balance, which I think is a great shame because
Mm-hmm.
the value that volunteers bring to the board environment. And look, I've been a chief exec and I've torn my hair out and been like, oh dear God, if I didn't have this lot, life would be so much easier. But the
Yeah.
reality is fully appreciate the value that those individuals bring as a collective. But then
Mm-hmm.
if they're not striking their own balance in terms of their
Mm-hmm.
perspective,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes difficult then to make a decision around or to make a I wouldn't even say an informed decision. I would say because you can have as much data and as much intelligence and as much information
Yeah.
as you can possibly have,
Yeah.
but you can still be looking at it from an unbalanced position or skewed perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. I agree with that. And then also maybe even taking it a step further, understanding, of course, dynamics of the board, personality theory, all
Mhm.
of that, who's speaking up, who's kind of just falling in line or maybe not, advocating with the knowledge that they have as strongly. So who's the squeaky wheel, or who's kind of leading the charge and maybe bending the thoughts a bit. But no, yeah, and that's why I think collecting data matters. And again, things like running surveys, doing focus groups, segmenting those out, being able to clearly like report to the board and say, here's what we're finding. Now, what do you think? As leaders in this industry, as people who have been trusted and voted into these positions, what do we do based on the data? So not what's best for you individually, because maybe now I'm going to play devil's advocate here a bit.
Mhm.
Maybe we can also put the onus on the association staff if they are
Yes. Mhm.
giving this data, if they're not collecting and then giving the data and reporting it out to the board, then it's almost like, well, then the board just has to go off of what they personally experience
Of
and
course.
what they know from being at events, talking to people in the industry, all that. So if we don't give them that data, if we
Yeah.
don't say here's the willingness to pay, like sometimes the board will say, oh, we can just, or let's price here, that's too high. But it's like, well, maybe people are willing, and if you can show them no they are, or that's too high, like the board might say we want to go here, and it's like, no, really, like the
Yeah.
people are not going, we're going to lose too much in sales where our net profit, it doesn't make sense. We're
Mhm.
better at this place. So you, as the specialist on staff, you have to know your products, whatever it is that you're overseeing, collect data, present that to the board, allow the ED to advocate well, and then hopefully guide. Because the board has valuable input. It shouldn't be that you're telling the board this is what we want to do and that's it. The
No.
board is there for,
Mhm.
for a purpose. That's why we're organized the way that we are. But yeah, as we're kind of organically talking, it's on us as staff as well to present that
Yes.
information to the board.
And I think people think, I know that people think I can be awfully hard on the volunteer leadership
Mhm.
side. And it's because, I'm acutely aware that they're volunteering and
Mhm.
actually they may need more support than
Mhm.
I assume senior staffers, because senior
Mhm.
staffers are doing the job day in, day out. However, I completely agree with what you're saying there. The onus of responsibility is shared
Mhm.
across the volunteer and the paid leadership team. But I think if nothing else, and actually there's plenty, but actually I'm listening, I'm just reflecting on the half hour we've been chatting. I think, you know, it's it blows my mind sometimes when you read an article, and like I say, we're going to share this, and should I sunset my program, and this is a really it's a really informative. This is how to, this is what to reflect on. This is how to get into the detail of it, and this is, how you should come to those conclusions. But isn't it interesting that when you just have a little time just to kind of delve in a bit further, and you
Yeah.
realize it never ceases to surprise me, even though I've been doing this such a long time. I mean, working in the non-profit world, not
Mhm.
the podcast.
Yeah.
It never ceases to amaze me. Actually, when you start to uncover the layers, start peel back those layers. God, the amount you've got to be mindful of um, is staggering. Just a
Mhm.
simple question of should we shelve this one program? And look, we've
Mhm.
already spent half an hour just talking about the machinations and the nuances of what the reality of working in the for-profit versus the non-for-profit world are. So
Mhm.
thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Um, Now we can find Michael, we can find your website at pricingforassociations.com.
Yep, that's
And
it.
we can find you on LinkedIn. Of course we can. And you're
Yes.
going to come back and you're going to join me again once you've published tell me now again, the document, the piece you're
Yeah,
working
yeah. Yeah, the pricing and value governance document. Yeah, that I would love to be back and talk about that.
on. Excellent. Excellent. No, I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, Andrew, thanks for having me. This was great.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And if you've enjoyed today's pod, I encourage you to take a look wherever you find your podcasts. We're on Amazon, Apple, Spotify, Google, the whole range of opportunities. Please find us, Association Transformation, add us to your favorites. You can also find us on our YouTube channel. And I dare say that of many other places, but Elisa normally does this, and I can't remember the script. However, she always tells me to end faithfully or with um, the request that whatever you're doing this week, remember to put your members and your mission first.